Today's Thinking Thursday is probably going to be the most important one I ever make. But before we get into that, if you're in a communal bathroom, you've just opened the door, you've just done your business, flushed the toilet, would you then lick your hand? Because if not, I would ask you to advocate for, in all places of work, for there to be at least one cubicle that has a sink. And here's why. So, when you are menstruating, you then have to change that menstrual product. You must touch that sanitary product, and in some cases, you must physically insert it into your vagina. And that means that you have to take all of the bacteria from the places that you have just touched and insert it into an area that is just as absorbent as the inside of your mouth. Now, if we don't want to have those bacteria and we don't want to have those toxins exposed to that very sensitive membrane, then it is important that we wash our hands before we have to change our sanitary products. So if you wouldn't lick your hand right after you've just done your business in a communal bathroom, please advocate for your workspaces to have at least one cubicle that has a sink in it. Okay, so we're talking about menses this week. Now, if you feel like you're someone who's like, oh, I don't menstruate, that is not appropriate to me, I'm going to give you 3 reasons why it is very necessary that you keep watching. Number 1, spotting toxic shock syndrome is super important and may save the life of someone you know. Number 2, helping younger girls choose what sanitary products they use may save their lives. And number 3, if you are expecting when you go through your andropause, oh yes, that's right, men go through menopause and it starts earlier and lasts the rest of your life, then please listen in to what the menstruating people in your life need, because if you start going through your male menopause and you haven't had the sympathy to listen to their needs for their menopause, then please do not expect that they are going to show you any sympathy when your testosterones are sinking by 1 to 2% every single year that you're alive after your 30th birthday. So listen up, boys. Toxic shock syndrome is when the Staphylococcus aureus bacteria get to spread so much that they go through the bloodstream and then they actually make the blood all over the body dangerous to the person. Basically, they have a blood infection. And Staphylococcus aureus likes to spread in environments that are high oxygen and have low lactic acid. Now, a product that is perfect for introducing oxygen into an area that is highly porous to the bloodstream, i.e. the vaginal column, is tampons. This can lead to things like vomiting and diarrhea, bloodshot eyes, a sense of fatigue, feeling endlessly nauseous. Oh yeah, and paralysis, like permanent paralysis, or death. Yeah, it kills. And so when this infection of the Staphylococcus aureus bacteria goes into the bloodstream and makes the whole blood system septic to the person, it can lead to the death of limbs or the death of the person. So how do we spot it? Well, it's things like vomiting or diarrhea or a high fever whilst someone is on their period. So when they're actually bleeding, the time of the month where you are most likely to use a tampon is the time of the month where you are most likely to get Staphylococcus aureus infections. The vaginal vault, which I love, that's such a great phrase, but basically all the inner area of the vagina really doesn't want to be overly oxygenated because the oxygen encourages toxins to breed, and then those toxins can pass into the bloodstream because the walls of the vagina are very soft and those membranes pass a lot of things through. And what we have the lowest of at that time of the month is the mucosal barrier. So the vagina usually has a mucosal barrier that does amazing stuff. So it's like keeping the pH very low by using lactobacillus, which is like the most protective good bacteria that you have in your vagina and produces lactic acid, which keeps the pH low, which is an environment like low pH is not what toxins want. Toxins love a like higher pH. So having a lower pH is great. But when you're on your period, you actually have a higher pH, and that puts you more at risk of things like toxins or Staphylococcus aureus breeding and spreading because they like a higher pH environment. So right at the moment that you are most susceptible to infection is when you are introducing air with a tampon, because a tampon literally pushes air up the vagina and then traps it there. So you already have a situation where Staphylococcus aureus or other toxins have more of a party environment for them to thrive in by the pH being higher than it normally would be whilst you're on your period, because the estrogen level has decreased and therefore you're not producing as much mucosal lining. However, when we use a tampon, that means we're literally introducing air through having to kind of open the vaginal vault to introduce a tampon, and then it's trapped there. And then the oxygenation from the oxygen that the tampon has introduced into the vagina is then helping the toxins and the Staphylococcus aureus thrive even more in that space. And this is where tampons become such a risk for toxic shock syndrome, because then you are increasing the exposure to toxicity, the environment that it thrives in, and then leaving that for potentially 8 hours to just do its thing, spread all over your body and like potentially kill you. So in a situation where someone has to go to work for, I don't know, like 8 hours, and they don't have a space where they can safely change a sanitary product, that leaves them quite at risk, don't you think? So yes, please advocate for bathrooms that have at least one cubicle with a sink in. But also, if you know of someone who uses tampons and is on their period and is showing signs of diarrhea or vomiting or headaches or nausea, or they have a fever, please just get them to a hospital and have them checked, because they may be experiencing toxic shock and you might actually save their life. Similarly, if you have people in your life who don't know how to choose sanitary products, giving them this video might also save them from going through a toxic shock experience. It's super important that you switch out tampons and pads. Sometimes a pad isn't going to protect you from leaks. And unfortunately, in our society, that's a problem for women. It shouldn't be. Having periods is not a disease, but if we leak in public, it can cause major issues. So for as long as society is enforcing that we cannot free bleed in public, it's really important that we're able to make the right choices. If you are going to use a tampon because it prevents you from leaking whilst you're doing an activity that is requiring a lot of movement, swap it out for a sanitary pad whenever available, or use something like a moon cup or something else. Using tampons repeatedly actually increases the risk of toxic shock syndrome. And this is something that is falsely taught. We're told that with tampons, we just have to change them regularly. But actually, every time we change a tampon, we're increasing the oxygenation levels of the vaginal vault. And that actually increases the environment that toxins and Staphylococcus aureus love to thrive in. So please, if you are a bleeding person, do not use tampons all the time. Swap them out for pads or other sanitary products like moon cups or diva cups, things like that. Or maybe as society, we can just accept that bleeding isn't a terrible thing, and maybe we should have spaces where we can just free bleed. That would be great. Thirdly, I will describe to you some of the symptoms of andropause so you can see whether maybe that might increase your sympathy for people going through menopause. So 1, mood swings. 2, depression. 3, weight fluctuations. 4, headaches. 5, night sweats. 6, insomnia. And 7, bone density loss. Does that sound anything like menopause? Maybe we can have a little bit more sympathy for the effects of aging with each other and try and understand each other's experience a bit more. So now let's get into who the hell this Thinking Thursday is about. Today's Thinking Thursday is about Dr. Nancy King Reame, who was epic and continues to be epic. She is a research professor in nursing and medical sciences and is like the leading world expert on menopause. But her work that she's most recognized for is actually to do with the opposite of menopause, as in menstruation. So she's currently getting quite a lot of recognition for the fact that she was the lead of the task force that created the absorbency rating for tampons. So back in the 1980s, there just wasn't any kind of regulation into how tampons class themselves in regards to absorbency. And this caused massive problems because women would leave the tampons in too long and then that left them exposed to toxic shock syndrome. And similarly, if your tampon wasn't absorbent enough, well, then that just left you in a real pickle. So she was part of the task force that was formed by the FDA called the Tampon Task Force to make a standardized system of absorbency. However, she found some problems along the way, which was that they were using a syngina, a synthesized vagina made out of glass, which is literally like a condom in a bottle with some water bath inside the bottle around the condom to create vaginal pressure. and it has absolutely no relevancy to pH levels of a vagina, which is like a crucial element to how toxic shock syndrome is caused. And it does not do anything. It stays in one place. It does not have a job to go to. It does not have to go through a fitness class. It does not have to do anything. It has no mucosal layer. It is fucking irrelevant when it comes to a vagina. However, they thought sticking a tampon inside of a condom was an accurate test to absorbency levels inside a vagina. And you know what? They went even further by testing it on blue saline solution. That's literally salt water dyed blue. I don't know whether it was dyed blue because the concept of it being red would have freaked out the almost all male team that preceded the tampon task force. But to this day, despite the fact that Nancy and her team proved that blue saline solution has frickin' nothing to do with the viscosity level of blood, it's continued to be used. Yes, that's right. The FDA still requires that you use a Syngina and blue saline solution. Even, like, it doesn't take a genius to look at blood and look at salt water and go, that's not the same viscosity. Those are not going to have the same absorbency rates. But no, that's still what we're doing. That's still how science works. Decades, like a lot of decades later, they still managed to get an absorbency rating pass. So when you see on the side of a tampon box, light, regular, heavy, super heavy, that's to do with them, which they managed to do on hyperneated blood, which is blood that has no clots in it. So she and her team were actually testing with blood, you know, like they should have always been. However, they were still having to use the Syngina, which is just a sin, as far as I can see. One thing that was really important that they did was that they got Rely tampons taken off the market. During 1980, there were 800 cases of toxic shock syndrome, which, like we've mentioned, is deadly, and 40 of those women did actually die from it. The problem with Rely tampons was that they were basically tea bags filled with carboxymethylcellulose flakes, and those would expand really rapidly, but they'd only been tested on blue saline solution, never actually on blood. And they sometimes would absorb so much that they were really difficult to get out. But they also absorbed the mucus lining. So we've talked before about why the mucosal lining of the vagina is so important to health. When that's absorbed and it's taken away, it again increases the risk of someone going into toxic shock syndrome. So if you have a situation where you're at that time of the month where the estrogen levels are lowest, so therefore you're producing the lowest amount of lactic acid, which is the thing that keeps the pH normally low, so your pH level is higher, which is the environment that toxins and Staphylococcus aureus like to thrive in, and then you're inserting air every time you insert a tampon, which oxygenates the area further, which toxins and Staphylococcus A really like. And then, on top of all of that, you've taken away the last mucosal barrier that you have because it's been absorbed into the tampon. Well, it's not really a surprise that there were 800 women who had toxic shock syndrome. What is a surprise is that the FDA still requires a Syngina to be used, even though it's stupid, and that blue saline solution is still used for absorbency ranking. Why? We have the medical proof that that doesn't work. The problem with a Syngina and blue saline solution is that you have no mucosal layer that is needing to be protected, and you also don't have the correct absorbency levels because blood is more viscous than saline solution. So it's not really an accurate test, but that's still what the FDA requires. Come on, FDA, we know this is stupid. Require something closer to an actual vagina in the testing apparatus and require actual blood to be used when testing absorbency. Dr. Nancy King Reame's research hasn't just been based around menopause and menstruation. She's also done papers on Klinefelter syndrome, which is when men have XXY chromosomes, and the lesbian childbearing experience, and estrogen found in soy milk and soy products. Her research is super fascinating and really widespreading, but they are also so important and undersung. Huge amounts of advocacy has been done and the research is out there. Unfortunately, mainstream media isn't going to give it to you, but I will. I'm going to leave some links down below so that you can see some of the publications for yourself and educate yourself. But if you feel like you wouldn't lick your hand after you've been to a communal bathroom, then maybe be an advocate for at least one cubicle in the place of work having a sink. Okay.